Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Overt Operations, when the red team gets in your face. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Matthew Toussain, SANS Certified Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Matthew. Matthew, you're muted.
Thanks, Carol.
There
That's
you go.
whoops, helpful. All right, howdy everyone. Good to see you all today. I think we're gonna have a good time. So this webcast's about overt operations. More specifically, it's about red teaming kind of in general and a strategy for it that we don't necessarily think about. But before we get started on that, this webcast is actually part of an entire series that we're going to be doing with SANS related to red teaming. Technically, it's the second part. So the series isn't necessarily just webcasts, it's also other kind of content. So some of you who are tuning in today may have been on our recent workshops. So SANS is now doing these Tech Tuesday workshops. Every Tuesday, it's a 2 to 3 hour hands-on, well, fun time, let's say. And we've already done one of these when it comes to the topic of red teaming. This was 3 weeks ago now. Don't quote me on that, something like that. We'll probably be rerunning that workshop at some point in the future again, just because it fully, I say sold out, but all of the content in this series is going to be free. So, and that was free as well, but it was fully booked, let's say. And it seemed to go pretty well. So if you're joining me and have been to that workshop in the past, hello. If not, welcome. I think we're gonna have a good time today talking about overt operations and such. But when it comes to the red teaming concept and the content that we're putting out right now, SANS is really heavily committed into delving into this field. And we're going to have multiple webcasts that kind of build off of this one, and each one explores a different component, if you will, of red teaming, a different idea, maybe. In this case, we're talking operations, overt ones specifically, but that's not going to be the only thing that we'll be covering in the long term with these webcasts in this webcast series. Sorry. When it comes to SANS, we actually have quite a few courses now that touch on red teaming, if you will. There's 564, which is out and available at the moment, and there's TBT 570, which is out but not available because we're not doing on-site work with the whole coronavirus thing. TBT 570 isn't per se a red team class, but it is a red force, blue force, team-based operation and training engagement. And in TBT 570, the students are the blue team and I'm the red team. 665, I might have revealed something a little too early here, is a course that's actually based off of teaching people to be that kind of red team. 565, excuse me, so many numbers, gosh. And 665 are two new red team classes that SANS is working on at the moment. George Ochies is running 565. It's in development. It's not out yet. And 665, which this webcast is based off of, is also in the works. In SANS, we're really focused on being able to provide cutting-edge material, things that are really where the whole community is going, if you will. And red team is really at that edge at the moment. We see it in two different sides, if you will, security-wise. The first piece is a little bit unfortunate, and that's everyone wants a red team right now. Everyone. Why? Because it's a buzzword, and it's the thing. Red teaming is in. But not everyone's quite ready for a red team yet. So, there's pros and cons on that. But on the SANS side, we want to make sure that we are able to provide education at the cutting edge of what we're doing in information security at a day-to-day basis. And so we're really starting to take a deep dive and delve into red teaming from a cybersecurity perspective in the here and now. And so, yes, 665 is potentially in the works. We'll see what happens. But it's about advanced red teaming and tactics. Now, don't worry necessarily too much about the details there. Like, you might be new to information security and on this webcast, and that's just fine. When it comes to these webcasts, we're trying to give back to the community. That's the objective. And you don't necessarily need to have a huge background in order to get some value from these. So this webcast is based on material that we're trying to build towards something like a 665, but it's curated and compressed, and I don't want to say watered down, but we've adjusted it, if you will, so that it'll fit into some kind of community sharing that we can give within an hour-long component. So we're going to be talking specifically today about overt operations, but we're going to be talking about that with full knowledge that it's in the context of what may become a 6-day SANS course. And so I've taken the easier examples, if you will, and we're using those in order to frame this conversation and also to drive some of the demonstrations that we'll be doing. The environment that we're going to look at, or that we're going to pose this context, this conversation about red teaming around, is what you see on the screen here, which is to say we've got that's embarrassing. I wasn't actually playing the screen, was I? Everything was on pause. You can see it now, though. So we're driving this conversation around is this environment that you can kind of see on the screen here with multiple subnets. It's a real enterprise. There's a Windows domain there. There's actually 2 Windows domains there. This is simplified for your essay, but so when we start talking about this enterprise environment, we're talking about multiple different subnets and multiple systems within that context. So our objective here, when we talk about covert operations versus overt operations, is really to focus on what makes red teaming interesting, but also the basics, right? Because I think that we often drive really, really deeply into details before we're actually ready for them. So let's talk covert operations and overt operations real quickly. At a very basic level, most of the red teaming that we try to do, we intend to be covert, right? Because what a covert action, let's say we're running a command on a remote environment that we've compromised, that covert action, the intent of it is for the blue team not to see it, right? We don't necessarily want them to know what we're doing on the environment, because if they know all the things that we're doing, they might catch us, right? They might find where our access is to systems, and they might boot us out, all of those things. Okay. With overt operations, that means that we're doing something where we acknowledge that the blue team is probably going to see it. And there's a lot of reasons why that might happen. Let's talk about the first one here real quickly. So the first way that we might see overt operations is kind of the standard mentality behind red teaming in general, right? We get into the environment, we compromise some systems, move laterally, okay, we're there, and now we want to test the blue team, right? Okay, we're operating covertly, they don't see us. Let's raise the noise floor until we identify what level of noise they can identify that we're there. This is the most basic idea behind red teaming. This is really what formed the foundation of it. At what point does the blue team begin to see you, and how can we use red team to train the blue team to be able to see us? Cool, so far so good. We may do overt operations in order to raise that noise floor and be caught. But that isn't necessarily the only reason or context in which we may do overt operation. For example, these days, and we'll talk more about this in just a moment, but these days blue teams can and they have the opportunity to be really good and quite powerful. Okay. In which case, there are certain things as a red teamer that we may want to avoid doing, like running a local command to shell because we expect that there's some kind of command line logging in place, and we realize that if we run a local command, that might give away our presence. Okay. In an ideal world, we might have a large number of capabilities that we can use to avoid or become more covert. But in the real world, we realize and we acknowledge that being covert takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And we can't monetize a red team engagement to such a level that we can be perfectly covert 100% of the time. Just not going to happen. So we may do what you call OPSEC, so operational security, unsafe actions. If you look at something like PowerShell Empire, it's a C2 toolkit. If you're doing something that it considers OPSEC unsafe, it'll give you an alert to let you know, hey, what you're doing, go ahead if you want to, but what you're doing might be a little loud, let's say, and might alert the blue team to your presence. But at the end of the day, we need to accomplish our red team objectives, and as a result, we might make some some compromises, let's say. And those compromises might be overt operations. There's two so far reasons why we make overt decisions. The first one being we want to raise the noise floor. And the second one is we have to make some compromises in order to get operations done. But there's a third one that we really want to focus on today. And that third one is this. If we know that situation 2 is going to be true often, which is to say they're going to be able to see what we do, and we have to be able to do it anyways, even though we know they might have the opportunity to see that, what other overt operations could we potentially take advantage of in order to be able to accomplish the objectives we have as a red team? Here's an example of, say, the history of covert versus overt operations over time. Because the thing is, covert operations is actually a moving goal, just like security is, right? When we look at blue team detections, they're getting better and better over time, and good on them. That's outstanding. But what's covert today versus yesterday versus tomorrow are all different. So just like defenses are rapidly changing and continuously evolving, so is what constitutes covert. For example, you might have an environment that is really, really bad. There's no blue team at all. Versus an environment where there's a really active and well-trained blue team. Covert in either of these circumstances is very different. And that makes perfect sense. The thing is, red teamers, penetration testers, we've gotten acclimated to a world where nobody's looking. And so if you look at covert operations 20, 25 years ago, you might have something like sub 7. Bonus points if you recognize that image that's slightly to the back being sub 7. Oof, 90s malware right there. And in front of it's another piece of malware called Poison Ivy. If you were to use either of these on any environment today, I would very much hope that you are instantly blocked by, well, everything. Hopefully detected as well. We'll talk about the difference between detected and blocked in just a moment, because that's a really substantive difference. But the point is, in the past, something like Metasploit was covert. Why? Because nobody was looking for it. An outbound connection? What could be wrong with that? And the answer is a lot of things. A lot of things. But the key takeaway here between all of these different methodologies of attack is that covert operations has changed. Today, if we were to run Metasploit, that might be something as a red teamer that I do because I want to alert the blue team to something. I might want to test to see if the blue team has the ability to detect something as basic as a Metasploit interpreter. That's an overt operation. Now, we can do overt operations for that purpose, but again, in this context, we're going to be talking about overt operations as a method to control the blue team and make our red teams even more powerful and effective. Oh, right, one other thing. With Metasploit's interpreter, eventually people started to get wise to it, right? You had antivirus that was catching it and blocking it and stopping it. And so you had Shikataganai, which is a encoder for the Metasploit interpreter that essentially changes its signature. And today, if you were to use Calculator and encode it with Shikataganai, basically every antivirus ought to detect you, right? Ought to block you as a result of that because it thinks that it's malware. Okay, so detections are also evolving. The thing is, there's a real big difference between being detected by an antivirus automated mechanism and therefore blocked by that same mechanism versus being detected by the organization. Let that sink in for a moment. Being blocked and detected by a machine versus being identified by an organization. Very big difference there. Because let's say I trigger antivirus. Okay. But nobody really notices or thinks about it or alerts the security team that there's potentially a compromise. Okay. Can I try to bypass it again and again and again and again? Absolutely. Absolutely. If there's static defenses in the environment, we can continuously modify our attack techniques until eventually we are successful. It's not a one-step process, but we can keep doing it and doing it and doing it again. And the actual blue team in this context is none the wiser. Not because they shouldn't be, but because nobody's looking. And this is the world that we've kind of experienced as penetration testers and red teamers over the past 20 years. Nobody's looking. But that's starting to change. It's starting to change, in my opinion, for the better, but it's also getting a little painful for us as red teamers because blue teamers are starting to pay attention. Even paying attention to the basics is a big, big difference, and it's a major change to the way that we think about our operations. And so what was covert in the past might be overt today, and that's okay. So because blue team capabilities on the rise, we have to think about what that means for us. In fact, Anthony, if you're here, hi. This was a tweet that was tweeted at this webcast earlier this week about blue teamers versus red teamers. And I thought it was perfect. It's absolutely lovely. So I added it to this slide. And the reason for it is that I completely and utterly disagree. Sorry, Anthony. But the thing is, when it comes to red team versus blue team operations, I always hear this. So you're not the only one by any means. I hear this all the time. As a blue teamer, I need to be successful 100% of the time. Red teamers, they can get lucky just this once. And if they do, well, I'm out of a job. That's not correct. Anybody who's been a red teamer for any amount of time can tell you that. Like, as a red teamer, I need to get into the environment. Maybe I do that via phishing. Hopefully that's not detected. Once I eventually, yes, inevitably somebody's going to click on my phishing ruse. Okay. Once I inevitably am successful there, I don't drop my ransomware and leave, right? Like if I'm an attacker out of the Ukraine and I want to monetize, I don't phish a single person, drop ransomware and go. If I'm not local administrator on the device, I probably can't even run the ransomware, right? So we got to do local privilege escalation. I don't want to just ransomware one system because then IT is just going to reprovision that one and say, tough luck, dude. So what we have to do is we have to take so much control of the environment that our effect is going to be worth the organization paying for it. That means lateral movement to multiple systems. It means getting domain administrator access. There's a lot of post-exploitation involved in any attack. And as red team, we're emulating those threats. So the thing is, a red team needs to be successful at 100% of the entire engagement, just like the attackers do. A blue team only needs to be able to detect and respond at any one of those instances. You're successful one time in the entire engagement, and you can boot that red teamer, that attacker, out of the environment. The problem is that traditional defense is still focused on this Maginot line of security, where if it gets in through the boundary, the phishing message gets in, we haven't done proper IA training, and so users click on links. Well, it's over. And that's why this fatalistic point of view on the blue team still holds sway. Because in all honesty, a red teamer doesn't have to get lucky once. If we do a really good job of defending our networks, a red teamer needs to get lucky a couple, 3, 5, 6, 7 dozen times in order to make the full compromise work. And so if we look today at the top 0.1 to 0.01% of environments, and I realize that that's a high bar, but there's a lot of organizations like Open Security, my company, Black Hills, InGuardians, Trusted Sec, who a lot of our customer base are these 0.1 to 0.01% companies, right? And they are doing a massively good job, right? They are massacring red teamers left, right, and center, and it hurts. But the thing is, good on them. Good on them. Because the thing is, as a blue teamer, it's your home field and you should have the advantage, but you need to take it. You need to absolutely go out and weaponize your environment against the attackers. And if you've done that, you really, really, really do have the advantage. And organizations who are doing top tier red team have started to realize that. And as a result, there's a couple different strategies that we've had to take. See, the thing is, losing to blue can be really frustrating. But we have to resist that urge to be frustrated, to be angry, to be mad. Oh, it's not fair. I only have a certain number of IP addresses. In the real world, the attackers would have fast flux going on in 100 different systems with rotating it. I get it. But what can we do in that context as red teamers? Because the thing is, security is not fair. And what we were doing for the past 25 years is not fair to the blue team either. It's real world, but it doesn't feel good to be a blue teamer in that context. And today, if you're a red teamer going against some of the best organizations from a security perspective, it doesn't feel fair either, right? I mean, if you look at Carbon Black was just acquired by VMware for, was it $1.4 billion? I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the billions, right? Billions of dollars on this defensive company. And we as red teamers, look at our tool set, right? We might be using something like Cobalt Strike, okay, commercial tool. How much is Cobalt Strike worth, like the company? I think it's Strategic Cyber LLC is technically the company name there. That's not billions of dollars of investment, which means we're competing. And Carbon Black, to be fair, is one company on the defensive side, one company. And on the red team side, we've kind of clustered around Cobalt Strike, and that's our jam. But it's not $1 billion, let alone the hundreds of billion dollars that the cybersecurity industry is. So how can we compete with that? You're right. It completely, utterly, totally is unfair. And it's also a little bit unrealistic, which we can also acknowledge too, right? The attackers, they're not necessarily only relying on commercial tools that they bought. So their monetization strategy is very different than a lot of us in the red team community is. For example, if you're in a top tier red team shop, your organization likely has custom malware and custom C2 that you've built in-house yourselves. I've been in community talks with Black Hills and InGuardians and Trusted Sec folk as they say, an open security representative, and we've collaborated on a lot of these things. But a lot of those things, while we do release plenty of stuff open source, we've actually closed source and kept many of that stuff in-house because we need to in order to be able to represent what these attackers are doing on a real day-to-day basis. And so if you don't have that ability to leverage those custom in-house sole source generated tools, what do you do to combat this rising blue tide, blue wave, if you will? And that's good on the blue team. It absolutely is. But we need to be able to elevate our capability on the red side in order to make this work. And on that note, if we think about what happens, right, we got to think about, hey, when we get angry at the blue team, say, this isn't fair, what's our mental position behind that? First off, we should probably not be angry about this. We're here to make blue better, period. That's it. So if blue wins, that's great. But if blue wins and we feel like we weren't able to perform as well as we needed to make blue as good as they should be, then we have to look at ourselves and identify what we can do better. Okay. Now, the basic way that we tend to do this is we say, hey, look, how did you find me? How did they find me? And we identify what that is, and we make that thing more covert. Okay, this does work, and we've been doing this for decades as red teamers. But I think when we do that, we're also missing out on a lot of opportunity. Specifically, we're focused on this little itty-bitty thing that got us caught, and we're going to make that more covert in order to not get us caught. Makes sense. But if we take a step back, and we look at the operation itself as a whole, what we might find is that there were other opportunities that we left on the table. For example, when we're trying to not get caught, our knee-jerk reaction is to say we want to hide in the noise. But we never think about what it would look like if we made some noise. For example, this right here. This was at a TBT 570. This was first TBT 570, I think, in New Orleans. And in TBT 570, we do 4 different red team campaigns, and the blue team tries to defend against it. And we have fun, a lot of fun. In fact, red team attack plan right there, owned a lot of stuff, popped a lot of boxes. But the thing is, did the blue team know about that? And in this case, yeah, the blue team knew that there was a compromise going on, and they were trying really, really hard to oust them. The second round of this, the blue team actually did a pretty good job during this campaign of killing a lot of that access. Well done, good on them. But they knew because they had some insight, they had a sight picture, they were able to see what was going on in the network. But what's important to note here is if you're really familiar with the tools, on the right-hand side, you'll see Cobalt Strike. On the left-hand side, the tool called Prismatica. What's going on the right-hand side is actually fog of war. If all of those things get kicked out, all the IP addresses for C2 servers all get blocked, no big deal. Because it's all there to hide what's going on the left-hand side of the screen. It's a lot of noise. We're making the noise such that our important operations, we're actually performing the effects, get to hide within it. And today, because blue team, particularly on the network side, defenses have grown so dramatically, we don't actually have a great ability to hide within static corporate noise. And I realize that a lot of red teamers are going to say, hey, hold up. I still hide in the noise just fine. Not to be rude, but if we're talking bottom 80% of companies in the world, which again, 80%, yeah, we can hide in the noise with Metasploit Meterpreter. Now, if we're talking top 19% or the next 19% above that, yeah, it was something like, say, Cobalt Strike, some C2 profiles, a little bit of extra jazz. Cool. We can probably still hide in the noise. But if we're talking top 1% companies and beyond, it's not that simple. It's really not that simple. And if you've tested for these kind of companies, or if you tested a bunch of companies and you had one that was like, oh my gosh, these guys did a great job. I couldn't do anything without getting detected. Well, welcome to the top 1%, or the top 0.1% or 0.01%. The thing is, blue teams have this opportunity. They haven't generally taken it, right? We're talking 1 out of 1,000 companies here, 1 out of 10,000 companies here. Even if we're talking Fortune 100, we're still talking the very top cream of the crop of them. Frankly, if you have a bigger enterprise, it's harder to get this kind of level of awareness on your enterprise network because you have more noise. But it is absolutely an assailable goal for blue team. They can absolutely take care of this. And if they have, as a red teamer, whew, is it painful? And in those cases, sometimes it's not good enough to hide in the existing noise. Sometimes we need to make noise that is real attack in order to hide underneath what we've made. That's what we're going to dive into here. We need to think about the blue team themselves and what their response looks like. For example, if we take the example of, say, EDR. I love EDR. I think it's a great idea because it's not antivirus. So antivirus is supposed to find bad stuff and block that bad stuff. And companies, organizations have the expectation that EDR is next-gen antivirus, and that's absolute bogus. But because they have that expectation, all of these EDR vendors have to deliver on that too, which is just aggravating. It's really aggravating because it's actually hurting the blue team's capability to respond. It really is. Because EDR stands for endpoint, so that's the system, detection and response. That's what it stands for. So it's supposed to elevate interesting events to the blue team so they can identify something that they maybe want to take a better look at, an indicator of compromise, let's say. And then also provide them the ability to dive onto that system real quickly and then begin looking and responding to whatever they found. That's what EDR is. Now, if you look at, say, Carbon Black or CrowdStrike or whatever it might be, they generally also have protection capabilities, and they'll find signature-based antivirus or signature-based detection to find malware and then block that. But the reason they have that is because enterprises and organizations who are purchasing these products think that it's better antivirus. And that is such garbage. It is completely incorrect. It is just a wrong-headed way of looking at these things. Frankly, in my opinion, the best antivirus out there is Windows Defender. Guess what? You've already got it. But EDR has some really powerful things to consider about it too, because it's this blue team. I'm pointing over here because my slides are over here. It's this blue team pipeline, right? Blue team needs to find you and they need to respond to you if you're the red team, that is, right? And so if we look at red team versus blue team engagements, it's an interaction between these two groups. And the objective for the blue team is to be able to detect and respond before the red team delivers effects and says mission accomplished. It's the exact same thing with a real attack, right? The attacker wants to get in. They want to not be detected because if they're not detected, they have longer to do whatever it is they want to do. Okay. But the blue team's objective is to detect them and be able to oust them before ransomware delivery date, right? I've done a lot of ransomware incident response lately, actually. Ugh. But I was doing a big one, actually, it was within the past year. I was doing a really big incident response for a ransomware engagement. Okay, let's say. And the attackers were in the environment for 8 months before they delivered their actual ransomware effect. I mean, this isn't an attacker getting lucky one time and the blue team need to be effective 100% of the time. They were in there 8 months. That's 8 months of opportunity for the blue team to have found this and responded to this. This wasn't a top 1% company. And so they had no idea until ransomware delivery date that they were even compromised. That's unfortunately quite typical. Just ask the city of Baltimore. Jeez. But as a blue team, and as red teamers training our blue team, our objective is to get that detection and response window into a period of time that's acceptable and that will allow us to detect and respond before ransomware delivery. In the case of that organization, if they'd gotten it below 8 months, they would have saved $1.4 million. We can do a lot better than that even. We really, really can. But if it comes down to it, this attack detection and response window is a big gamut of opportunity for the blue team. And so if we're red teamers and we need to be able to be effective, right? We need to say mission accomplished, get better blue team. Okay. If that's our objective, right? To keep pushing the blue team to better themselves, we need to be able to accomplish the effect within detect and respond. That's it. That's it. So from this detection response continuum, we need to be able to get in and do operations and deliver effects. Cool. Now, inside of that, the traditional way that we do this is covert operations. We say, hey, look, if they can't find us, then we have all the time in the world to deliver effects. But we're leaving a lot of other opportunity here. So if we're saying, hey, covert operations so that we don't get detected, therefore they can't respond. And this is 100% of how we red team. What we're saying there is, I need to stay underneath the detection radar 100% of the time. Cool. But let's think of some other opportunities. Can we change the detection radar? Yeah, absolutely. Let's say they're using Splunk, right? Splunk D is the Splunk agent listener service that then shovels logs to Splunk. What if we kill that process? Is the system that we're on going to continue to log to their SIM? It's not. So what we've essentially done there is we've reduced the detection surface and we've stretched that detection timeline. And this is the crux of what we want to do in red team. We're talking about advanced defenders. We don't want to just rely on covert operations because when it comes down to it, we might not have the tooling or the time in order to be able to operate underneath the noise floor that we need to for the most advanced defenders. And so we need to adjust that detect and respond timeline appropriately. Okay, so attacking defenses, attacking detections specifically, and being more covert. Okay, those both are focused on detection, but they're actually, and ironically, only half of the equation. I actually surveyed a bunch of red teamers out there over the past 3 weeks or so in order to get some material for this. And I found some interesting results. The first one was actually with red teamers and blue teamers that I surveyed. The first team was from red teamers. I asked red teamers, hey, do you find attacking blue team defenses to be in scope? And from them, the majority said yes, that's in their experience in scope. But they also, by far, said there's no time inside of a red team engagement to do that. I think that they're wrong, but we'll talk about that here in just a moment. But what was crazy to me is that blue teamers actually by far, well more than the red teamers said that it was in scope. So a lot of red teamers are like, no, it's probably not going to be in scope because whenever we do something to a blue team defense, that detection engine, let's say, would need to get fixed. Let's say we killed Splunk.exe and then we replaced it with malware so that whenever Splunk.exe runs, it's actually running our malware. Okay, it's an example of weaponizing a defensive mechanism for the purpose of attack. Cool. Is that in scope? Is it not in scope? Well, the thing is, if you do that, you have to go back and undo that at the end of the engagement. And blue team tends to not be very happy when you break their defense capability. because real world, they need that defense capability, right? But what was what was interesting to me is that blue team thought by and large that that was okay. And red team, to a much lesser degree, thought it wasn't. So it turns out the blue team expects you to attack their defensive capabilities much more heavily than the red team actually thinks it's okay. Really, really interesting results there. And the second piece of that was time, of course, right? So red team is something they have the time to actually engage these. And if you were to invest a lot of time into something like this, the vendor would just be able to build a patch. Let's look at what overt operations can look like or be like, and consider real quickly whether or not it's patchable, because I don't think it is. So what we're talking about here is an overt to covert continuum, right? And there's 4 general strategies where you may actually engage something like this. If we're trying to be super duper covert, we slow down our operations, because then whatever that noise floor is, we operate even deeper underneath of that, right? Maybe our beacon interval is, hey, it's beaconing back to us every 5 hours instead of just constant, right? Interactive operations, if you will. Okay, we're lowering that noise floor so that there's less likelihood of us being detected. This is covert. Cool. But if we go to more overt, we get some really interesting stuff. For example, we can target those network detections. Okay, that's a little bit less covert, but it's still the idea is not to get detected, right? So it's still covert, ideally. Hack faster, right? We're talking about a timeline here. Detect and respond. If we can be below the detect and respond timeline, we're still effective. So hack faster. We acknowledge that they're going to be able to detect us, so we're going to act in an overt capacity, but because of that, we know that, let's say, the detect and respond window is 24 hours. Just throwing a number out there. Well, then we have to be able to complete our entire objective in 24 hours. Go for it. And to be fair, there is some merit to this, right? A lot of attack toolkits, let's say Cobalt Strike as an example, do in fact have scripting capability. And the scripting capability can allow us to act faster on the network. And as we increase our capability and our effectiveness as red teamers, we may be able to get our engagements, our entire engagement timeline in a compressed schedule. And if we can compress our operations below that actual detect and respond window, that's still effectiveness, right? But it's much more overt. The other thing that we can do is we can attack the blue team. See, we've been doing this for decades on the attack side. Decades. For example, if we look at the 90s, the big thing in the 90s was viruses, right? A little program that just replicates over and over again, so you fill up the entire hard drive and the computer can't work anymore. Or Anonymous just came back, right? And Anonymous is doing denial of service attacks via SYN floods. These 2 attacks are what we call resource exhaustion attacks. So we're denying service by exhausting all of the available resources, therefore nobody else can use those resources. But what we fail to look at as red teamers is that blue team is a resource and that their time is finite. So we can do blue team resource exhaustion attacks. Heck yeah, we can absolutely do blue team resource exhaustion attacks. No doubt, right? If they're responding to, let's say it's not one red teamer. Let's say that there are 500 red teamers attacking from different places around the world simultaneously against this one enterprise. Hackers 1995 style. Is that going to be harder for a blue team to defend against? Heck yeah, it's going to be harder for a blue team to defend against. They're going to have to deal with so many more things than they have the capacity to deal with simultaneously. So how can we, as say a single red team, do all of that, or at least make it appear as though we're doing all of that? That's the crux of overt operations. We know they're going to be able to detect what we've got. We know they're going to try to respond to what's there. So let's make a lot of stuff, and let's make them have to respond to so many things that they've exhausted all of their blue team resources and can no longer respond to either A, everything, or B, the thing that matters. Let's take a look at that. To be specific, what we're trying to do here is stretch either detection or stretch the response timeline. In order to attack the blue team, The first thing that we have to identify is, what is the blue team? If we look at most security operations centers today and enterprises, they're split into two groups, network and host. Typically, the host side is kind of overlooked. The network team gets all of the kudos and resourcing, and the reason is because they got these expensive blinky boxes going on they have to watch. And also, there's a couple of reasons, to be fair. Network-based detection is really effective at what pen testers and red teamers are doing today. It just is. It's really effective because we have finite resources and we allow them to realize that we have finite resources, and it's easy to block an IP address. It's easy to detect data exfiltration over a DNS channel and then black hole that DNS name. This is true. So network-based detections and responses are really powerful today. Host is often overlooked. In my opinion, this is a big mistake. This is a massive mistake. There's so much more opportunity on the host side than there is on the network side. It's just that red teamers and penetration testers haven't actually weaponized the way that blue teams defend against the blue teams. Which is one of the fun things about doing TBT 570, for example, because I get to take advantage of all these blue teamers from AWS and Amazon and Disney and you name it, right? They're there and they're doing their standard strategy, and they've never seen someone who's going to take advantage of their reliance on network-based defenses. But we can absolutely do that. But a lot of what we may need to do there is creating and making some noise. But as red teamers, we need to identify what all of these groups are. In a really big enterprise, you might have some important components of the enterprise that have their own security teams. Let's say that you're an oil and gas company. You've got security teams that are dedicated to your OT environment in addition to, say, your enterprise environment, right? As a red teamer, what we need to do is we need to look at our entire engagement and campaign and what our objective is in order to identify what the key components of the enterprise defense are that we need to exhaust. Because if we exhaust, say, network, but host is going to detect us and boot us out anyways, we haven't done enough, right? So we need to identify the different detection teams and groups, and we need to exhaust each one of those resources individually. If we look at network resource exhaustion, you may note that the screenshot in the bottom there is from AI Hunter. AI Hunter is from Active Countermeasures. Really good tool. In fact, when we were doing incident response and then remediation and consultation recommendations for organizations after the fact, AI Hunter is one of our top recommendations because it really focuses on what malware does, right? And it looks at detecting malware based on its behavior, beaconing activity, those kind of things, beaconing interval, all that stuff against frequency and time-based domain. Really solid tool. But the thing is, it also makes a perfect example of how we can break defenses. For example, what if everything is beaconing? The entire environment is beaconing. What do you do? How do you respond to that? What if the entire environment is beaconing to something unique? For example, consider this. This is a tool I'm working on at the moment and will be releasing here at some point in the next couple months. But consider TCP. Yeah, I said TCP. Once upon a time, we had this attack called the Mitnick attack. And the way that it worked is a lot of operating systems, they didn't randomize their TCP IP sequence numbers. And so the ISNBs were predictable in nature, which means you could just hop into an existing TCP session and take it over because you could guess the sequence numbers appropriately. As a result, those are now randomized, and you can't really do that anymore because the randomization degree is pretty darn heavy, the entropy, if you will. But that's a defense against those kind of things, right? But as a result, for a lot of our attacks, we've got some interesting considerations. For example, consider this. Let's say that I have Cobalt Strike. Cool, I'm using Cobalt Strike. If I want to do covert operations, I might use some malleable C2 profiles. Awesome. This makes the actual communication look like it's Amazon, AWS, makes it look like it's Kindle Books, makes it look like it's Google Drive communication, but it's actually the C2 server communicating with the remote agent, the actual backdoor. They're just communicating in the same style that, say, Gmail does. Cool. These are malleable C2 profiles. If we use the default Cobalt Strike C2 profile, an IDS like Suricata will pick it up right off the bat. So if you're using something like Security Onion, bam, you'll see it right there. Cool. That's good for the defenders. But it's a little interesting for us as well, because we can essentially take our covert techniques and we can convert them into overt opportunities. Let's say we take a dozen Cobalt Strike beacons, default, and we just plant them everywhere. Not in places we actually intend to use. They're just there to make the blue team waste time. Okay. Very, very basic overt stuff. But we can take this a couple steps further. The reason why it's a little bit difficult to spoof this is because of TCP. For example, Suricata's signature for, say, Beacon's default profile might require an outbound request and an inbound response, and for those two to look like Cobalt Strike malware. Cool. If we're spoofing this, let's say we say Cobalt Strike Beacon, we put it somewhere, and its IP address that it's beaconing out to is not a legitimate C2 server, you're not going to have the two-way communication. And so while a lot of detection systems will identify this as malware anyways, some won't. And if we want to confuse those, we actually need the outbound and the inbound. But TCP makes this really hard to do, because for the inbound to be accepted through the firewall's established related stateful configuration, those things like ISNBs and checksums, they all need to match and they all need to work out. The reason why we can't just straight spoof them is because of things like randomization of the ISNBs to defend against Mitnick attack and such. But if we know what's being sent out, we can craft the proper inbound response, because we own both pieces of the sending and receiving and sending and receiving on both sides, right? This means we can do full-on spoofing fakely. Let's say that your IP address is 10.0.10/24, right? 1 through 255. That's your IT enclave in an environment, let's say. Let's say there's no system listening on .20 of that range. We can spoof traffic coming from him. And if we're spoofing that, and we know that we're spoofing that, we can spoof the inbound response as well. And it'll make it through the firewall. It'll make it through on both sides. 100% of both ways. Yes. Yes, it absolutely will. This means we can make fake Cobalt Strike beacons look 100% realistic end-to-end without there needing to be an IP address or system. Well, actually, an IP address would be needed, but a system on either side, right? It's a fake system on the internet, and it's a fake system on the internal environment. What does this mean? It means that we can have 1 million C2 servers, because we just pick 5,000, or actually 5,000. We pick 1 million different IP addresses on the internet, and we pretend that those are our C2 servers. And our internal system fakes a non-existent internal system and makes it connect out to 1 million also non-existent external systems. And our external device sends the proper response coming in, spoofed again, from all of those. 100% of both sides of this will route successfully. 100% of it. What does that look like in your IDS? Are you going to be able to block 1 million IP addresses? Good luck. Block the internet. I mean, we can make this come from any IP address. Google.com, the NSA, GCHQ, Russian intelligence. Здравствуйте, comrade. Whatever we want. And so if you can't defend it on the network level, what do you have to do? You have to defend it on the host level. But remember, this host doesn't exist at all, because he spoofed that too. This is deception on the attacker side as opposed to the defender side. There's a little bit of a spur up right now, we'll talk about that in a little bit, about cyberspace deception as a defensive mechanism. But a lot of us on the attack side aren't using that style of technique because we don't want to be detected. So we're using covert operations instead of overt operations. With overt operations, deception is an opportunity again. More on that in just a little bit. Let's take a look here real quick. This is an example of ELQ Stack. This is Kibana. and it's a dashboard, right? So you're seeing something like users that are most active. What we want to essentially do when we're doing overt operations is we want to identify all of these little dashboards that blue team creates, and we want to fill that dashboard to capacity. Fill that sucker to capacity, right? They're doing network-based monitoring for self-signed SSL certificates or weird SSL certificates. Fill it. Fill the thing. Is any of it real? Well, yeah, all of it's real. All of it's really bad. All of it is really bad. In this case, the noise isn't the enterprise noise. The noise is the attack noise. But there's so much attack noise, you can't actually filter down to the enterprise reality as a defender. So your defensive utility, your defensive infrastructure is completely worthless because all of it is garbage. And instead of us as the attacker being hiding under the noise and the defender supposed to be looking for a needle in the haystack, being that noise, now we've created so much noise that the needle in the haystack is the real enterprise information. The real information at this point is the needle in the haystack. They can't even figure out that to allow it. I mean, they can turn off the internet, to be fair. That would work. Maybe. We look at the host. It's a little bit different. On the host side, there's a lot more detections. There's a lot more detection on the host side. To our benefit, most enterprises are ignoring the host because the host is hard. Just like there's a lot more detections and a lot more stuff to avoid as red teamers on the host, there's a lot more stuff to do as a defender on the host as well. So today, most defenders are really, really reliant on the network. And that's actually, for us as attackers, which is really to our benefit. We basically have a free lunch if we can just stuff the entire network detection full of garbage. If we stuff that full of garbage, we're good to go. In most enterprises, because even those enterprises with these kind of detections, which to be fair, those are even a minority, they're so heavily reliant on network-based detections that if we fill that pipe, we've got a free lunch. But if they're better than that, right, now we're talking 0.01%, they're better than that, their host-based defenses can actually give a lot of insight. So we got to stuff those pipes too. For example, they might be looking at Windows host event logs. Their EDR products might give them insight on, say, command line things that are being run. Let's take a look at some of these things here real quick. Let's say there's Mimikatz. Mimikatz has got signatures, so something should be alerting the blue team if Mimikatz gets run. Well, let's run that everywhere, shall we? That'll help fill that pipe. What are these kind of things that we're looking at on the command line? This is actually something very useful for blue teamers, right? They call them living off lands, binaries, and scripts. As red teamers, we use them in order to not have to have really functional malware that has a high opportunity for signatures, like something like Mimikatz. So instead, we might use things that are already there. But a lot of really good blue teams these days are actually looking at command line events, like, let's say, run DLL32 being executed, and then it executing a DLL from run HTML application in order to execute an HTA file on a local system or execute JavaScript in order to invoke their malware. Okay. A little bit complex situationally there. We won't really have the time to get into that during this webcast, though we'll talk about those kind of things in a future webcast because it's really core component to something like 665. But if blue teamers are looking for this, let's give it to them. Let's run all the PowerShell on all of the systems. And while it might be PowerShell Empire and it looks really, really bad, we're not actually looking at it after we execute it. We don't want the session. I know, that's crazy, right? As red teamers, all we want is shells to rain down from the high heavens. And in this case, we don't even care about the shell. We're just trying to make the blue team think that we have a shell or are operating somewhere so that they don't realize what we're really doing. Or they don't have the time to look at what we're really doing. And this is very Sun Tzu, right? What we're talking about here is reverse deception operations, because cyber deception on the defensive side is starting to get a little bit popularized right now. For good reason. They have the home field advantage, but we can make them think these things too. For example, if we're looking at malware, we might name our malware Splunk D because it looks legitimate. We might name it after some kind of VMware process. If you've been around for a while, you might have been used to every piece of malware ever being named svchost.exe because there's plenty of those out there and they look real. This is deception. But the thing is, we can take deception as defenders to an inordinately higher degree by weaponizing the defenses and the defense techniques and tactics that blue team's employing against us to a really great degree. This will allow us to create some kind of fog of war in the actual environment and give us much more freedom of maneuver inside the enterprise organization while doing our red team. There's a podcast by Kevin Fisk. He's the author of 550, which is on cyberspace deception. But that podcast is all about different deception techniques as well, and I definitely recommend you give it a look-see. Most of them are focused on, as a defender, how can we use deception? But of course, we can do the same thing as attackers as well. That does bring us right about to the end of our time. It does bring us to the end of time. One real quick demo, real quick one. Let's see here. Yeah, this one's a really quick demo because we are running low on time. But yeah, here's that enterprise environment I was talking about. Where's the VM I want? There we go. Okay. Okay. No. Okay, so here's an example of some Windows event logs. We just pulled down some event logs from the security log. These are things that, say, any SIM, security information events manager, like Splunk or ELK, should be able to pull in so the blue team can actually look for events that are maybe bad. Like, let's say, a new domain and admin being created. Let's say command line logs for something that's a LOLBAS, right, living off land binary and script. The thing is, though, we don't necessarily even need to run the thing we want to show up in their SIM. All we have to do is make it match the right event log. Take a look at this. This is the help file for the new event log commandlet in PowerShell. And of course, we can do this with other utilities inside of Windows. We can also do it with straight .NET if we want to be even more deceptive so that they can't see us managing or modifying their event logs. But either way, we're creating a massive amount of noise. But take a look at this piece. Creates a new event log and new event source on a local or remote computer. This means that we can use this commandlet to create events on systems where we don't even have a shell. Heck yeah. You want them to think that you're running all kinds of crazy bad commands on a system where you don't even have a shell? Yeah, we can do that. New event log. All we have to do is format the event log the same way as the real one is, which we see right up here with get event log. We have full ability to control the site picture that the blue team sees, and they're a target. And if they have no idea what's going on, or if they think billions of things are going on that aren't even real, game over. It's game over, man. All right. We are out of time, but I hope that was an interesting webcast for you all. I think we do have a little bit of time for some questions, though. Hit us off, Carol.
All right. Thanks so much. There are actually no questions at this time. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to enter into the questions window? The first one that threw me off, it says, is this seen only to you and presenters, Carol? I'm not sure what they mean by that, but nope, all the attendees can see. So, all right, I'm not seeing anything more come in. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.